In a time long before your pillow decided to wage its eternal war with the alarm clock, there existed a humble man by the name of Henri Nestlé. In the mid-19th century, this entrepreneurial gentleman found himself stirring pots in a small Swiss village, inadvertently crafting the seedling of what would become a giant supermarket favorite, none other than Nestlé. Imagine, if you will, a simpler era where one could stroll down cobblestone paths without bumping into text-walking pedestrians. Henri, with his top hat tipped and moustaches twirled like pasta al dente, was an all-purpose inventor, aspiring to solve the world's nutritional dilemmas one recipe at a time. His pièce de résistance emerged amidst a rather serendipitous mixture of milk, sugar, and wheat flour, a concoction that would be known as farine lactée, or quite charmingly, milky flour. This product was revolutionary, designed as a supplemental food for infants who could not be breastfed. It was a nourishing answer for mothers everywhere, whose little bundles of joy had more ravenous ambition than a cow at a grass buffet. And thus, the tidy, cobbled streets of Vevey echoed with whispers of this wondrous invention, like the origin tale of a Swiss fairy tale, complete with its own once upon a time. Now, while the gentle sounds of sleeping infants might be music to the ears of parents, the symphony that played on the cash register was equally sweet to Henri. Nestlé soon became the cherubic face of European baby care, though perhaps not a cherubic baby face. Heavens no, not with that impressive moustache. Seeking further opportunities, he had the brilliant idea to expand globally. Yet, as the story goes, not everyone was as quick to dip a toe in Henri's milky waters. Enter the robust realm of controversy, a chapter, well, not literally a chapter, for we're still cozily nestled in our first, but let's not worry about numbers, that accompanies any legendary tale. You see, with expansion often comes scrutiny. As farine lactée took root in foreign soils, whispers of unease replaced the delightful cooing of satisfied Swiss infants. Critiques and conundrums sprang forth like organic popcorn over an unattended bonfire. Critics argued that promoting this substitute at the cost of breastfeeding hailed the dawn of a curious conundrum, a delicate dance between science and Mother Nature herself. This divide, like the width of a fondue fork, would shape Nestlé's hazy path through the thickets of global business complexities. But let us not drift too far from our peaceful slumber topic, as controversies can send the brows furrowing and sleep drifting away. In the gentle sway of our historical hammock, we shall savor each moment, allowing Nestlé's narrative to unfurl softly like cinnamon in a morning cafe latte, graced by one's favorite barista. As the night deepens, placeholder crickets begin their chirping duet outside your window, and our story folds its first leaf. Let's slowly bid goodbye to Henri for now, leaving him in his cozy workshop, spoons and ingredients at hand, dreaming dreamy dreams of worldwide ventures far sweeter than any sugar-dusted recipe. And for you, dear listener, as you gently sway on the edge of dreams, let the stories we share be the lullabies that guide you into a restful sleep. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. In the year of our Lord, 1866, long before cat videos and coffee memes became the raison d'etre of the internet, a fellow by the name of Henri Nestlé found himself in a sleepy little town called Vevey, nestled gently between the snow-capped Alps and the glistening waters of Lake Geneva, Switzerland. Now, Henri wasn't your average townsfolk. While others perhaps dabbled in cheese-wheeling contests or yodeled to their goats on lazy afternoons, Henri was cooking up something a bit more milky. Born Heinrich Nestlé, Henri decided to swap the C for an A to add a touch of French flair. Always a wise choice when you want your name to say, "I'm a serious entrepreneur," and not, "I'm just melting in alpine pastures." In the midst of his peaceful surroundings, this fiery German-born pharmacist had a vision, a world where infants thrived on something other than sheep's milk, or the futile attempts of parents' sock puppet skits during feeding time. You see, Henri had noticed a disturbing trend. Many infants were struggling to survive, and while village physicians were experimenting with all sorts of bizarre cures, none seemed to potently deliver the ever-elusive wonder: nutrition. A pragmatic mixologist at heart, Henri tinkered away to create a delicate blend of cow's milk, wheat flour, and sugar, a concoction as nourishing as it was palatably revolutionary. He called it farine lactée, or in English, miracle milkish porridge. While the name didn't precisely roll off the tongue, its effects spoke volumes. Babies began to flourish, and the people of Vevey were collectively thrilled, albeit a bit startled by infant athletics breaking out worldwide. Of course, Henri's creation didn't remain a closely guarded Swiss secret for long. Soon, news of this miraculous concoction wafted across borders, much like the scent of hot cocoa on a frosty winter morning. The Nestlé brand was born, and with it, the early murmurs of a tale that whisked away through time, spanning continents, sparking controversies, and ironically, many a bedtime story. Henri wasn't just a man with a milky plan. He was a marketing maven of his era. He realized mothers would hang up their lace bonnets, knowing their little cherubs had the best sustenance, perhaps even out-wrestling the neighbor's child in the annual foot race. So he marketed with precision, no doubt dreaming in sepia-toned visions of infants flexing biceps in a pseudo-Olympic display of vitality. But dear sleepy listener, before you drift too far into sugary dreams of historical heroism, remember, as with all fairy tales, not every element sparkled unblemished. Despite its pioneering ambition, Henri's efforts got tangled in accusations of nutritional inferiority from rivals, disputes heated enough to make even the steamy Swiss fondue pot blush. Imagine heated debates in century-old fonts, letters flying faster than carrier pigeons, each side armed with a battalion of scholarly missives. As the clock ticked sleepily towards the 20th century, the global horizon beckoned, and Nestlé's powdery progeny surged onwards, serenaded by the humming lullabies of train engines and ship whistles, all poised for lands far beyond the Alps. Could the tiny powder empire, cradled under Henri's industrious wing, soar into an era of industrial revolution and colonial, searing conquests? As expansion loomed, so too did the murkier sides of growing global empires, and Henri's vision would soon face trials not dissimilar to a sprightly game of Wake the Sleepwalker, rather unpredictable and occasionally quite precarious. And with that gentle nudge towards the blanket of tomorrow's revelations, tuck yourself in a bit tighter, dear listener, for the world of Nestlé is but beginning its lengthy dreamscape journey. Hidden within history's folds, unspooled in whispered twilight tales, lies a continuation to this saga of milk, mountains, and the great mysterious dance of nourishing a blossoming world. But for now, allow the gentle pull of sleep to cradle you, as the dreams of faraway 1866 and the quaint town of Vevey draw naturally to a close. As we settle into the cozy ambience of our imaginary hearth, let's whisk ourselves back to the late 1800s, a time when carriages clattered and monocles weren't just for steampunk conventions. Picture, if you will, our protagonist, Henri Nestlé. If names were destiny, Henri might have become a humble birdwatcher, but curiously enough, Nestlé would go on to stand for a multinational conglomerate rather than a pension for comfy nests. Nestlé started as a pharmacist. Imagine a Victorian pharmacy, filled with bottled wonders that promised to cure everything from headaches to heartbreaks. Henri was on a mission, oh yes, indeed, attempting to address infant malnutrition. His wild idea was to create a nutritious alternative for mothers who, quite frankly, needed a little help. Envision him dashing electrically around his lab, albeit in a very 19th century sort of way, probably twirling his handlebar mustache in contemplation, and note the birth of farine lactée, a nutritious blend that would become the world's first infant cereal. He was a visionary wanting to feed the world, quite literally from the cradle onward. The launch of farine lactée was like the premiere of a new blockbuster in a small town. It had a grandiose opening, capturing the attention of mothers across Europe. Babies were apparently bloated with glee, or at least dietary satisfaction. Yet the journey wasn't without its odd potholes. Soon enough, Henry's baby formula faced its share of critics. Whispers floated through the cobblestone streets, and not those ASMR-inducing ones. These whispers were laden with skepticism. In the chorus of discontent, some considered it odd that infants would need anything more than their mother's milk and the occasional lullaby sung off-key by their fathers. But Henry, ever undeterred, trusted in the nourishment of his formula as parents filled with both relief and suspicion lined up outside apothecaries. But what good is success without an eccentric cast of characters? As our dear Henri basked in his newfound renown, he was joined by his colleagues and competitors, each equipped with their unique quirks. Among them was our dear friend Mr. Cadbury, a man who looked at milk and saw not just nutritional value, but an opportunity to express cacao-related artistry. Competition brewed. Forgive the coffee pun, as that would come later during another caffeine-powered chapter. The world of Nestlé was getting more complex, like an elaborate Victorian dress. Nearby, John Stith Pemberton was concocting a little syrupy beverage in the United States that would eventually become, let's say, quite the hit. Yes, the 19th century was basically a golden age of sugar and innovative drinks, and Nestlé's place among quirky concoctions was strengthened as his brand expanded beyond baby food. The curious thing about a growing empire is that growth inevitably attracts more eyes. That's where the forgotten controversies take shape. It wasn't all cereals and milk baths, you see. Allegations of using underhanded strategies to sideline smaller competitors arose, sometimes delivered in the form of amusingly accusatory pamphlets. Imagine, if you would, a scandal being announced via intricately designed scrolls, narrated by town criers with a flair for drama. The drawn curtains of hallowed drawing rooms shaded many deals, and not all of them were straightforwardly sweet. Some say Nestlé's legal team danced a merry jig around patent laws, ensuring their baby formula, and later products, stayed comfortably uncontested. It's fascinating, is it not, how the path to success is often sprinkled with secrets. As Nestlé's empire bloomed, so did the caricatures of him as a milk-obsessed alchemist, and in less flattering portrayals, a robust capitalist. The truth, as it often is, resided somewhere in between as Nestlé diligently puttered forward, his tinkering spirit ever alive. And so, in our delightfully sleepy explorations of history, where facts mingle with imagination, we watch Nestlé's legacy take root. A legacy founded in maternal intent, yet certainly prone to the trappings of its own commercial success. As the fire in our hearth dwindles and a gentle yawn stretches through the room, we prepare to drift further, deeper into the intriguing layers of Nestlé's expanding influence, a journey that's far from finished. Wouldn't you like to know more? In the timeless dance of corporate rivalry, akin to a tango between two especially ambitious peacocks, we turn our gaze to the whimsical late 19th century milk warfare, an event brimming with drama, ambition, and a touch of lactose intolerance. Imagine, if you will, the rolling hills of Switzerland, where the cows mooed in chocolate accents and the pristine air was occasionally pierced by the sound of corporate brainstorming. Enter stage left, Henri Nestlé, part inventor, part culinary artist, and full-time visionary with a penchant for powdered milk. Our hero, with his carefully coiffed moustache and dreams as grand as the Alps, was on a mission to bring nourishment and baby food to the masses, convinced that a powdered infant formula would revolutionize feeding, and maybe, just maybe, save the day one burp at a time. Nestlé, however, wasn't the only visionary on these verdant pastures. An energetic young fella by the name of Julius Maggi, a man fixated on bouillon cubes and other culinary marvels, had already nestled into a cozy corner of this market landscape, spoon in hand. The advent of Nestlé's miraculous milk powder meant the bouillon-based dreams of Mr. Maggi required a swift taste adjustment. The Swiss countryside found itself a backdrop for undercover antics and whispered silos of strategy. Rumor has it that on one hushed afternoon, Henri, in a moment of mischievous satire, sent a congratulatory basket of his finest milk powder to Maggie. Wordplay being his second talent, after lactose innovation of course, he included a note offering his rival a way to water down any milky matters that might arise, expressing hopes they wouldn't curdle any burgeoning relations. Life in the milk powder lane wasn't all merriment. For the young women tasked with the laborious job of mixing this miraculous substance, a job that, mercifully, did not last long, those endless hours in damp barns required the patience of saints. But, ever clever, and with a touch of humor, our narrative echoes with the voice of a farmhand named Greta, remembered for her proclamation that Nestlé milk had bestowed upon the world a new appreciation for the art of powdery transformation. In this theatre of Swiss innovation, one could not throw a stone, metaphorically of course, as stones were needed for cow herding, without hitting another revolutionary venture. In a peculiar twist, Nestlé's method of dehydration turned curiously profitable during the World Expos that dotted the map with ambition and intrigue. There, with stallholders gallivanting about in capes and frock coats, his powdered milk was not just about nutrition, it was about global domination, one baby bottle at a time. The aforementioned expos were bustling with more than just powdered milk. Picture stalls glistening with the latest shiny gadgets and curious crowds marveling at the wonders of the world, from electric lights to oddly potent food enhancers. However, Nestlé's concoction attracted not just intrigued parents, but also the eccentric, mustachioed scientists who, amidst their own self-important discoveries, declared his invention a marvel of modern convenience and utterly delightful with coffee. Nestlé's powdered product became a household name faster than one could say continental breakfasts. However, much like the mule that loses sight of the carrot, success led to unexpected logistical hiccups. Supply could barely keep pace with demand, and it wasn't long before Nestlé found himself involved in the earliest form of customer service nightmares. Parents, outraged over late deliveries and curiously deflated cans, flooded Nestlé's offices with dramatic telegrams written in caps lock of Victorian proportion. Yet, in this swirling dairy dreamscape, our hero discovered an ally in none other than Jules Rimet, the very man who would go on to gift the world with the FIFA World Cup, and who, presumably, between concocting football tournaments and pondering global unity, hailed the powdered milk as the second best thing to happen to world children after football. So it was. A tale of whimsy spun out of alpine milk magic, clinking bottles, and one man's dream to make milk, and babies, powerful commodities of the modern era. As the sun sets over the Swiss horizon, we let our narrative meander ever onward, holding tight to the tales of powdered coattails, and journeying anew through the enthralling corridors of early 20th century nutriments and nocturnal novelties. Imagine drifting through the misty Swiss Alps, the shadows of yodeling cows lulling you into a state of sleepy amusement. As you glide along these majestic slopes, a faint smell of chocolate envelops you like a warm embrace, inviting you into the world of chocolate, and more importantly, controversy. Enter, stage left, the underrated maestro of confectionery dreams, Henri Nestlé, or as we might gently tease him, the granddaddy of every child's chocolate fondue fantasy. Now, while Henri might be best known for taking credit for turning your rainy days into sugar-coated quagmires of irresistible delight, it's his other invention that truly starts the tale we're dreaming about tonight. Picture the early 1860s, not quite the time of TikTok trends, but certainly brimming with equally questionable fashion choices. Henri Nestlé, a German expatriate nurturing his ambitions in Switzerland, concocted a powdered milk formula aiming to solve the pressing 19th century dilemma of infant malnutrition. His product, Nutrizin, a rather fabulous word for nourishment, professed to fortify weeping babies everywhere and thus reduce sleepless nights for parents. While fellow powdered milk pioneers might have been content cradling their tin can empires, Henry saw himself as more than just a bothersome milkman. His formula was ideally suited to a new kind of snack, chocolate. You might wonder how he dallied into this domain, but, as all great tales go, it was a little bit of accident, a pinch of curiosity, and perhaps a spoonful, too much of caffeine-infused ambition. During a dalliance with candle making, perhaps looking to brighten Europe's darkest winters, Henri encountered the legendary chocolatier Daniel Peter. As fate would have it, Peter had dreams of mellowing the often bitter bite of dark chocolate into a more family-friendly treat. This was the beginning of a partnership spurred by their shared desire to milk chocolate's epic potential, blending the virtuous purity of milk with the slightly sinful allure of cocoa. However, as the fairy tale progressed, so did the whispers. The mixing of nutrients, offering decadent flavors over virtuous properties, ruffled the feathers of health enthusiasts of the time who were determined to keep kids' teeth and adults' consciences intact. Henri, with a twinkle in his eye, persisted unapologetically, maybe musing, "Well, at least they're drinking milk. Kind of." The popularity of the new confection grew, ushering in both an industry titan and, inadvertently, countless dental appointments. To his credit, Henri did not rest on his laurels, or more accurately, his chocolate wrappers. Having successfully launched his products, he sold his company in 1875, enjoying a retirement likely spent by bearish harbors and sharper cheeses, while the Nestlé name became synonymous with that sweet, creamy escape from the mundanity of the everyday. And if you think this is the peak of hilarity, picture the marketing hype of the time: babies bouncing on milk cans, moustache gents, promoting chocolate breakfast treats with optimistic zest. Definitely a turn from the candle wax world. Henri once knew. But as your eyelids grow heavier, just remember, each marketing faux pas and each legendary Nestlé recipe you've indulged in had its birth in one curious, if a trifle controversial, alchemist's lair. With the room growing ever cozier and sleep tiptoeing nearer, just know these faux pas are only a hint of what lurks around the chocolatey corridors of Nestlé's colourful history. And with this gentle thought, we drift closer to uncovering another chapter of this delicious saga, where commerce, innovation, and a sprinkle of chaos continue to pave the sweet path of this confectionery maze. Imagine yourself walking along the cobblestone streets of Vevey, Switzerland, sometime in the late 19th century. The air is crisp, and the scent of freshly baked baguettes wafts by, reminding you that Switzerland, besides being the land of wristwatches and hypothetical neutrality, also dabbles significantly in the chocolate and baby formula industries. Today, we find ourselves delving into the unexpectedly tantalizing saga of Henri Nestlé's ambitious quest, not merely to feed the world, but to transform it, one controversially powdered milk formula at a time. Our protagonist, Henri, was a man of many talents, ranging from pharmaceutical wizardry to a penchant for reinvention worthy of the finest Swiss Army knife. But astonishingly, his journey into the world of nourishment began with an endeavor which he named, quite dramatically, farine lactée. Yes, it's French. And yes, it sounds much fancier than milk flour, which is essentially what it was. Henri's concoction was born out of necessity, a response to the rampant infant mortality rates that plagued his day. His innovation, a magical combination of cow's milk, wheat flour, and sugar. What could possibly go wrong? Certainly no one suspected that this humble mix would someday become embroiled in controversies of global proportions. But to Henri, it was a marvelous elixir that promised to solve hunger and upset the delicate balance of breakfast time as we knew it. The name Nestlé itself, believe it or not, means little nest. Now, that sounds cozy, doesn't it? The irony, of course, lies in the rapidly escalating nest-like dominance the brand would have over global kitchen pantries. When Henri sold his company in 1875, he likely had little inkling that his little nest would hatch into a mighty eagle, swooping down over unsuspecting consumer markets far and wide. Nestlé's next chapter in its rise to prominence wasn't without its quirks and curious detours. Fast forward a few decades, and the company found itself at the forefront of a burgeoning global food market, booming notably in condensed milk and, I dare say, hot cocoa, a delight that made cold Swiss winters a tad more bearable. But Henri's ghost might have occasionally spiraled in bafflement, observing the company's bold forays into instant coffee. Yes, Nescafé, saving college students since 1938. One jittery all-nighter at a time. The concept was novel. Coffee that would defy time itself, holding its caffeine powers in indefinite stasis until liberated by hot water. One sip, and you, like time, could just go on forever. Or at least until the caffeine crashed in the early afternoon. Speaking of delayed consequences, even in its earliest days, Henri's invention began to draw criticisms which would later crescendo into major controversies by the 1970s. Allegations arose regarding aggressive marketing tactics in developing countries, where infant formula was sometimes promoted over breastfeeding without adequate access to clean water or sanitation. But during Henry's era, the moral debate was still in its infancy, much like the babies who relied on his powdered wonder. Perhaps Henri would have quirked an eyebrow, sipped an espresso, and muttered something charmingly Swiss French like "C'est la vie," therefore casting a metaphoric shrug into the annals of history. Yet, through every cream-top caper and every cocoa bean conundrum, little Nest continued to flutter its wings, pioneering endeavors that would keep old Henri tucked cozily into the footnotes of entrepreneurial lore. The Nestlé story, it seems, is more than warmed milk and volatile coffee. It's a delicate dance of dreams, expansion, and, dare we say, deliciously improbable drama. As the Swiss sun begins its descent behind the Alps, casting golden hues across our cinematic tapestry of history, we pause here. Rest assured, dear listener, Nestlé's journey unfolds even further into the chronicles of delectable global dominion. For now, let the soft murmur of the Rhine cradle you into tranquility as we meander toward the next chapter, where yet more sweet mysteries await to be revealed beneath the frothy layers of Nestlé's journey. As the sun rose on Switzerland in the late 1800s, painting the snow-capped Alps with a rosy pink hue, a peculiar concoction was brewing in the serene town of Vevey. It's quite an extraordinary place if you've never been. Quiet, picturesque, and conveniently located near a lot of cows. There, nestled among the chocolate box scenery, a man named Henri Nestlé was busy perfecting a recipe that would soon transform the world of infant nutrition and ultimately all of our lives. Think of him as the Willy Wonka of baby formula, minus the eccentric wardrobe and questionable child labor practices. Now, dear listener, before you drift off completely, let's unravel how this dairy dreamland became the epicenter of one of Nestlé's earliest controversies. It involved milk, naturally, because everything amusing seems to involve milk or at least some kind of dairy quibble. You see, Henri Nestlé decided that cow's milk alone wasn't cutting it for infants who couldn't nurse. Apparently, cow's milk was akin to trying to quench a thirst with evaporated water, ambitious, but ultimately impractical. So, Henri whipped up his magical formula, combining milk, wheat flour, and sugar, packaging it as the solution to undernourished infants everywhere. Mothers across Europe thrilled at the idea of a shelf-stable option that promised to stem infant mortality rates. While the nursing elite may have exchanged anxious glances across gilded parlors, the product hit the ground running, or rather, rolling gently like an eager pram down a gentle incline. But as with all good things in history, like spacious exit rows on budget flights, controversy was never far behind. The problem, you see, wasn't in the intentions, but in the interpretations. Nestlé's newfangled formula was so enthusiastically embraced that it occasionally supplanted breast milk entirely, even when refrigeration was a luxury most could only dream of. Combine this with occasionally dubious supply chains, and what we had was less baby bliss and more hungry bairn. By the time these issues gained attention, a rumor mill of deliciously scandalous proportions had soon taken flight, finally coming to rest in the laps of concerned doctors worldwide. You can almost picture poor Henri, wringing his hands in his Swiss chalet, wondering how something branded to nourish the world's children had accidentally created confusion instead. Oh, Henri, if only he knew that the term Diet World Domination Plan would eventually become so commonplace in boardrooms. In the spring of 1875, the controversy swirled. The scientific community was voices a-chatter, papers a-flutter, a flurry of speculative correspondence that rapidly rivaled the Alps for sheer magnitude. Infant nutrition had become every bit as contentious as who painted the Mona Lisa, which makes sense if you've ever tried to decipher a nutrition label. Yet, here's the real kicker. Nestlé the company, and Henri himself, quickly learned from these hiccups. They pivoted, refined their approach, added advisory labels, and engaged with the medical community. Before long, the baby formula had not only found its footing like a toddler taking first steps, but was beginning to dance a delightful little jig of success. Once the metaphorical dust had settled, and the real cow dust billowed gently in the Swiss breeze, Henri had safely managed to weather the storm with his formula now properly aligning with medical advice. It managed to prove that sometimes controversy can be the best bedtime story chapter of all, a warm reminder that human innovation doesn't always come with a foolproof manual. Nestlé's journey was far from complete, but this incident became an invaluable talking point. It was an experience nested with lessons on growth, ethics, and always double-checking your supply chain. And so, with every spoonful of nutritious intentions gone awry, the world learned a little more about this milk-based saga. And as our thoughts usher gently into slumber, ponder how something as humble as milk could set the stage for grander adventures. Perhaps the dreams that await will explore these fair pastures further, where meadows of possibilities dance under starry alpine skies, amidst the symphony of crickets tuning up for their evening serenade and the gentle whispers of a soft breeze. We find ourselves nestled in the Swiss Alps, circa 1905. The tranquil mountains, however, were about to witness a stir that could ruffle even the most unflappable Edelweiss. You see, our old friend Nestlé was engaging in a peculiar endeavor, the human equivalent of finding a snowman in July, ambitious yet controversial. As the evening sun dipped behind the rugged peaks, one could almost imagine a corporate meeting, albeit with a twist. Picture it: top hats, pocket watches, and a gentleman named Heinrich who brings a cow just everywhere. This quirky boardroom, with its members seeping in a heady mix of caffeine and optimism, was devising a plan to introduce sugar into the new century. Their narrative was simple. A spoonful of sugar doesn't just make the medicine go down, it makes the medicine downright addictive. Nestlé's idea was akin to slipping a silk stocking on a scarecrow, a bold venture into sweetness to expand their horizons beyond just baby formula. The dawn of sugary temptations promised to captivate tastes and wallets alike. In essence, these fellows had a dream: to transform how people sipped, munched, and savored their usually humdrum diets. Now, if such ideas give you a sudden craving for chocolate, or perhaps a snugly warm milky concoction, you're already starting to feel the ripple effects of those heady days. Nestlé had latched onto a vision of uniting taste buds globally, an ambition peppered with whispers of both genius and, shall we say, creative eccentricity. Rumor had it that amid these grand plans, there was a hilarious mishap involving Hans, the local mailman. In a twist, much like the postal service trying to deliver in a blizzard, Hans accidentally delivered to Henri Nestlé the idea of sweetened milk powder right along with the wrong mail. Legend has it that this blunder set another kettle boiling on the back burner of Nestlé's culinary concoctions. Gentle snooze lovers, may you find it amusing that Henri, faced with the sudden influx of sugar-infused ideas, responded less like a seasoned businessman and more like a giddy chef let loose in the pantry. His reactions were known for being spicier than a Swiss fondue dipped in jalapeno, a testament to both his creativity and unpredictability. Yet, not all was meringues and laughter in this sugary tale. There loomed a greater storm ahead, a bit of a sugar rush downturn, if you will. The public had started to raise eyebrows and spoons about the ethics of it all. Concerns flourished as sweetly as alpine wildflowers in spring, hinting at health implications and the sugar's long-term sway over children's appetites. But let's not leap ahead. For it was during these times that Nestlé discovered perhaps their most enduring truth: nothing is ever what it seems. Each sugar-coated idea unveiled trails of controversies that Nestlé had to navigate with all the grace of a tap-dancing cat on a slippery roof. And always with a side of that Swiss humor, dry as a Toblerone forest, lovingly poking fun at the sheer absurdity of it all. As the sleepy night cradles us further into its embrace, imagine the whirring typewriters, the gentleman with his cow, with a smug expression mirroring their owner's optimism, and the sweet notes of an era not forgotten, humming softly with conspiracies sweet enough to lull even the most restless to sleep. Now, dear listener, as you drift into dreamland, softly cushioned by alpine scents and imaginative misadventures, let our tale envelope you with warmth. Tomorrow promises an even juicier slice of history. But for tonight, nestled snugly and sweetly in the trade winds of sleep, forget about Swiss shenanigans and let sugar plums, indirectly flavored by a certain confectioner's early pursuits, dance in your dreams. Nestled in the not-so-blushing heart of the 1970s, a decade known for its flamboyant flair and unapologetic bell-bottoms, Nestlé sprang forth with its infamous baby formula controversy, earning a reputation as the corporate Fleetwood Mac of infant nutrition scandals. Yes, we've reached the moment when Nestlé's saga took a slightly less milk and honey turn and more of a milk and cacophony sort of route. Picture this. The era of disco and polyester suits is in full swing. Amidst the eclectic chaos, Nestlé embarked on a mission as grandiose and groovy as a Saturday Night Fever dance floor, attempting to convince mothers around the world that replacing natural breast milk with its powdered formula was not just acceptable but, dare we say, preferable. It was a move akin to trying to convince Elvis fans that a jumpsuit wasn't the best attire, an audacious feat indeed. The controversy brewed like a pot of coffee that someone forgot to unplug. When it became apparent that in many developing countries, the water used to mix the formula was, unfortunately, less pristine alpine spring and more bog-standard swampy. Despite mothers' good intentions, this resulted in rather regrettable consequences for many infants' health. To pour a little more froth on this cappuccino of confusion, Nestlé was further lambasted for its aggressive marketing tactics. Allegedly leveraging imagery of blissful baby cherubs and white-coated nurses who might as well have had angel wings fluttering benevolently behind them, the company often failed to adequately stress the importance of clean water, a detail as crucial as having a life vest on a sinking ship. The agitation peaked with the start of what would become known as the living room protest of the international Nestlé boycott. Imagine, if you will, an army of concerned citizens reverently discarding Nestlé chocolate bars and coffee in a heartening but slightly sticky act of defiance, all while recordings of ABBA hit singles played softly in the background. One can only imagine the mullets that bobbed gently in protest as the corporation faced scrutiny over its handling or mishandling of ethical marketing. Amid the hubbub and caffeine withdrawals, many couldn't help but muse on how Nestlé might have overstepped in its earnest attempt to reach global markets, like a well-meaning friend at a party who, in trying to help clean up, accidentally tosses your most cherished mug in the bin. All this simmering scandal led to a significant and unprecedented event. Cue dramatic swivel to a calmer setting. The 1981 World Health Organization's International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. A document that might sound like a thrilling bedtime read to some, it set out guidelines to ensure that infant formula was represented fairly and responsibly in advertising, a step toward ensuring that no mother would mistakenly believe that powdered formula was beamed in from the nursery section of Olympus. Meanwhile, in Nestlé's boardrooms, perhaps longer coffee breaks were held, and quiet, albeit fervent, discussions echoed through the halls, reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes, pondering who stole the last crumpet at high tea. The metaphorical biscotti of accountability was nibbled upon, leading to progressive changes within the company, though not without a lingering reputation that needed nurturing more tenderly than a trusted sourdough starter. And so, like a gentle wave retreating from the shore, Nestlé's turbulent decade settled into calmer waters, carrying with it lessons as enduring as a lullaby woven into the fabric of the company's ongoing narrative. As dusk fell upon the outrage phase, and midnight approached on an era of reform. Nestlé would eventually find new paths, albeit with footprints in the sand that only the most inklings of time might smooth over. With the whispers of an increasingly vocal public still tangible, and the everlasting hum of societal progress nudging things towards a new dawn, Nestlé continued on its global odyssey. Meanwhile, night deepens softly around you, and a new part of the saga is set to unfold on the horizon. A journey not just of commerce, but one that resonates with the soft echoes of the past's lessons, waiting to grace your dreams in the whispered tales of what comes next. In the melodious dawn of the 20th century, a young and spirited Henri Nestlé set his sights on international stardom, albeit with less pyrotechnics and more persuasion. Now, dear listener, grab a cozy blanket as we tiptoe through the peculiar yet delightful corridors of Nestlé's fruitful ascent in the Far East, a chapter in history as unexpected as tea spilling into a perfectly good cup of coffee. Picture a time when not every corner of the globe was yet acquainted with the creamy delights of condensed milk. It was precisely at this moment when Nestlé, an enterprising fellow with a not-so-subtle appetite for the exotic, decided to venture eastward. Like a culinary Marco Polo, he sought to introduce the wonders of European innovation to the taste buds of countries with centuries-old culinary traditions of their own. The cultural crossovers weren't without their fair share of amusing misunderstandings. In one rather flavorful incident in Japan, Nestlé's marketing team, in their zest to introduce condensed milk as the latest craze, actively tried selling it as a perfect accompaniment to rice, a bit like suggesting ketchup at a sushi bar today. While the Japanese licked their chops at the innovation, a cultural conundrum brewed. Rice was a daily staple, and the sight of Europeans suggesting improvements to their ancient culinary companion, stirred some gentle waves of skepticism. Meanwhile, over in China, another tale brewed. Nestlé officials, eager to display their culinary treasure trove, hosted glamorous tasting events. Guests expecting exclusive Chinese delicacies were instead presented with the sweet, glossy texture of condensed milk, paired whimsically with green tea. The concept was akin to setting up a trampoline in a Zen garden, ambitious and likely to surprise. Yet in truth, it tickled the fancy of the adventurous eaters. In these moments of cultural exchanges, there was something inherently giggle-worthy about dignified gentlemen in tailcoats earnestly discussing the perfect ratio of sweetened milk to tea leaves with wise, silken-robed scholars, all while their glasses slightly steamed from the beverage peculiarities. It was a gamble, a dance of milk and market, that curiously paid off. What initially seemed a culinary cacophony instead struck a harmonious chord, softly serenading its way into the local palate, much like our gentle storytelling weans its way into your restful slumber. Of course, with Eastern expansion came a multitude of tongue-twisting challenges befitting a lullaby-rhyming dictionary. Mispronunciations of condensed milk in local dialects led to a variety of hilariously unrecognizable songbird chirps that bore less resemblance to dairy than to delightful phrasings of folklore creatures. Yet, as language fumbles entertained the masses, another Nestlé product quietly made its inroads: instant coffee. And what better theatre for its grand debut than in the backdrop of bustling Chinese ports, where energy and alertness were almost as valuable as the finest silks. Its ability to dissolve seamlessly into hot water appeared almost magical to its new audience, a mystical powder worthy of Yuan tales. As the evening tide of Chapter 10 approaches, let's say that these curious ventures were less about overwhelming global palates and more about creating conversations between cultures as soft and gentle as a featherbed. You might even say Nestlé was building cultural bridges, one creamy spoonful at a time, aided and abetted by accidental but wholesome humor. And so, in this chapter of dreamy historical misadventures, we find ourselves lulled by the gentle rhythm of ocean waves against the bows of trade ships, each carrying cargo vested not only in commerce, but in cross-cultural camaraderie. Meanwhile, as the scene gently fades, like the last notes of a serenade, let your thoughts drift away on the sea breeze, wondering what delightful circumstances might bubble to the surface next. Perhaps a tale of chocolate intrigue, or another morsel of history glazed with humor. In the mid-20th century, a fiercely determined man named Andreas Plotz found himself at the helm of a peculiar little dairy company in Switzerland. Andreas, with the maverick ambition of a man who believed cow's milk to be liquid gold, was not exactly a household name. However, his passions would inadvertently thrust him into the orbit of Nestlé, a company that was, shall we say, milking its way to the top of the food chain. Picture this: Andreas, with his penchant for grandiose scheming, stumbled upon a most daring idea. He called it the Great Milk Swap-Off. Andreas sought to buy enormous quantities of milk from other European countries during the surplus seasons, then store and sell it back to them at a dizzying profit during the inevitable shortages. This practical, yet somewhat cheeky maneuver centered around the simple fact that cows do get tired of producing milk at full pelt all year round, much like anyone would after too much hard work. Now Nestlé, having witnessed this entrepreneurial feat from their boardroom windows, was both impressed and miffed. Andreas's so-called milk magic ruffled a few feathers at Nestlé, a company that valued control and an even flow of milky goodness throughout its impressive empire. They had spent decades crafting an image that could juggle both baby food aisles and haute couture chocolate bars as if they were one and the same. Nestlé's response: a rather hallmark merger proposal. Imagine a business marriage, born not of romance but of practical accommodation, and that's exactly what happened. The junta of Nestlé executives, armed with the language of diplomacy and a fondness for lengthy board games, approached Andreas with an offer that would make any dairyman's heart pound like a butter churn, an invitation to become part of the Nestlé family. And not just any part, mind you, but the chair at the coveted table of milk product development, a heady position that someone of Andreas's tastes could hardly resist. Historians and well-seasoned storytellers alike enjoy spinning tales from this point, embellishing the drama with jokes about how Andreas's goats were not keen on joining Nestlé's ranks. It was less about any real protest and more about the goats' penchant for chaos over commerce. Nevertheless, Andreas's cows gave an approving nod, as much as one can imagine a bovine agreement. As the ink dried on the agreement, Andreas watched his legacy swirl into Nestlé's cream-filled history, like a spoon in a cup of their famously frothy coffee. However, one cannot help but sense that Andreas's spirit lingered. His approach to business felt like a lyrical dance, waltzing through milk surpluses and shortages with a gentle, rhythmic gait. Behind the scenes, Nestlé began to deepen its roots, quite literally, in global dairy markets, taking Andreas's concept of timing and turning it into a strategic staple. The company's influence now ran through milk runnels globally, a secret currency on which entire economies depended. And so, dear listeners, as you snuggle into your beds, often one foot in dreamland where teapots whistle tunes and chocolate rivers flow, remember Andreas and the humble milk swaps that helped forge a conglomerate giant. Perhaps it's a comforting thought to hold on to as you drift into slumber, that even a man with a fondness for surplus and the backs of cows could carve a niche into the fabric of history, no doubt enjoyed over a glass of warm milk. And just as you nestle deeper into your covers, confident in your newfound historical prowess, let the world of milk and mergers gently fade from your mind. As the night softly envelops you, know that our tale will continue, rest assured, with the quieter secrets of neckties and nappies waiting just on the horizon. In the serene embrace of a world unhampered by the blaring alarms of modern technology, imagine we find ourselves ambling down the cobblestone-lined alleys of 1940s Switzerland. The air is crisp, invigorating almost, as we delve into perhaps one of the quirkiest chapters of Nestlé's storied history, a saga of chocolate espionage and the tactical brilliance conducted over steaming cups of cacao. Picture a room, dimly lit but lavishly appointed by the standards of the day, where suave figures clad in impeccably tailored suits are quietly orchestrating a dessert-based diplomacy unparalleled in the annals of confectionery. For Nestlé, like the finest Swiss watches, was intricately poised for precision and performance, yet with a delightful dash of unpredictability, something akin to finding a whimsical gnome at the heart of a cuckoo clock. As the world wavered in the torrents of the Second World War, Nestlé leveraged its clandestine charm, becoming the purveyor not only of sweet sustenance, but also a subtle currency in negotiations. Tales abound of how a humble bar of chocolate could procure not just friendship, but swayed hearts and minds. Their bars seem to possess magical properties, perhaps imbued by elfin chocolatiers, with a penchant for global harmony and a hint of mischief. One such delightful tale involves a particularly suave Nestlé envoy. Let's call him Monsieur Chocolat, for the sake of discretion, who supposedly smuggled crucial communications wrapped ingeniously in chocolate wrappers. This meant that when the authorities checked for illicit items, they found only decoy sweet treats, unknowingly foiling intercepts that would have derailed entire operations. Again, why must life be serious when wisdom can so easily be wrapped in cocoa and laughter? Nestlé's charm offensive led to the cultivation of significant relationships, their ambassadors of sweet-spreading goodwill, one praline at a time. They were gourmet globetrotters, schmoozing like confectionery Casanovas, forging alliances that were as strong as the best espresso, yet smoother than the creamiest milk chocolate. Diplomacy, after all, is much more palatable when presented with a side of hazelnut. Meanwhile, behind the smoke of toasting cacao beans, the company was navigating a delicate business dance, a veritable waltz in patent leather, ensuring the sweet serenade of their success didn't falter when curtains closed post-war. Ingeniously, they spun strands of influence into a web of practical alliances, ensuring chocolate was not just a luxury, but a necessary morale booster. One might say, the backbone of true international unity. In this restful dance of destiny, nestled among accounts of deals sealed with subtlety and sweet whispers, there lays a cozy inclusivity. Intrigue wasn't just the dusty domain of spy novels. It had seeped into the everyday like cocoa into cream. And so, dear listener, as we tiptoe our way out of this dreamlike jaunt through secretive Swiss corridors, leaving behind the mere scent of cocoa-fueled whispers, we might find ourselves pondering, what other delightful mysteries does Nestlé's chocolate-stained history hold? And thus, with hearts slightly warmer, beds a little softer, we drift forward into the gentle embrace of the night, leading us toward a new chapter of unstirred history. As the sun rose with the energy of a lethargic marmot who had the misfortune of becoming unexpectedly photogenic, the leafy boulevards of Lausanne whispered secrets. Within this picturesque Swiss town, in the late 19th century, history was brewing not unlike a pot of overly caffeinated tea, a beverage Nestlé would ironically find itself selling in the future. But at this point, the company's focus was set on something far more innocent, the curious case of condensed milk and its journey onto the breakfast tables of unsuspecting families worldwide. Ah, condensed milk, that misunderstood goop. Today, it's a staple for grandmothers specializing in the mysteries of fudge making. But back then, it was a food miracle. You see, Henri Nestlé, a man who seemed part pharmacist, part innovation-driven gentleman scientist, had concocted something extraordinary. He adapted an existing condensed milk concept that many had tried to perfect but failed. Don't worry, none of the failed attempts were as dramatic as the proverbial "will it land on buttered side first" experiment, though they were potentially just as sticky. Picture Henri, now a maestro of milk preservation, standing in very crisp Swiss breeches, proudly introducing his product as a breakthrough in infant nutrition. Let's not forget, this was an era when regular milk was about as safe to consume as a mystery potion offered by a sketchy wizard. Spoiled milk was a menace that cowed society, no pun intended, and Henri promised something different, milk that resisted spoiling, ingeniously transported across the globe without any cows breaking into existential dread over their lactose-laden lease agreements. But oh dear, what's a tale without a sprinkle of adversity to stir the plot? In late 1870s Europe, where melodramatic moustaches and even more melodramatic opera were all the rage, Henri faced a rather perplexing challenge. A rival company had emerged, claiming their condensed milk was superior. It was like watching a Victorian-era bake-off, minus the Victorian sponge and with a lot more legal paperwork. These were the early days of patent wrangling, a time when a gentleman's handshake could be ironclad or, more commonly, just clammy. To anyone else, this might have been a showdown of epic proportions. But viewers, dozing in their nocturnal retreats, rest assured, the resolution was much calmer. You see, Henri believed in the gentle art of persuasion and craftsmanship, much like convincing that corner piece of jigsaw puzzle to fit politely in place. Meanwhile, the milk-loving public was often as blissfully unaware of these corporate scuffles as you might be when you discover the end of the rainbow leads to your neighbor's recently painted tool shed. So Nestlé's strategy was simple and effective. If you can't beat them, feed them. They managed this by simply ensuring their product was of undeniable quality, not to mention distributed with the charm of an eternal optimist's sales pitch. Henri's approach to business, much like any good sleep story, was determined but hardly aggressive, advocating for transparency and ethical standards, a notion ahead of its lactose-longing time. So how did this charming episode conclude? Much like a gentle storm settling into a pleasant drizzle, matters resolved quietly. The competing companies eventually found their niche, though not without leaving behind a score of mildly miffed dairy farmers. Henri and his successors expanded from milk to chocolate, continuing Nestlé's haphazard but gentle empire building, as smooth as a spoonful of, well, condensed milk on a pancake. As this chapter of Nestlé's history closes with the warmth of a Swiss sunrise, our journey, like a sleepy bedtime meander, is far from over. The brand had only just begun to plant its roots in the fertile soil of opportunity, and little did Henri know that milk and chocolate would become among the least controversial chapters in his brand's future chronicles. But hush now. Let those thoughts drift away like clouds over the charming Swiss Alps, as the next revelations quietly tiptoe onto the horizon, as our imaginary time train lazily chugs along the tracks of history. Our next stop casts a warm, gentle light on the tangled roots of one of Nestlé's most unexpected relationships, Italian milkmaids and their bovine companions. Picture, if you will, the rolling hills of Switzerland and Italy, where cows meander serenely among lush pastures that they believe, after years of grazing, were named exclusively in their honor. In this dreamy alpine setting, spaces were vast, and conversations were mostly moo-muttered between the cows, exchanging the latest udder fashion trends and prospective milk yields. Human-devised machinations often eluded bovine interest, but in the late 19th century, this was about to change thanks to Nestlé, the Swiss company that ventured southward with ambitions as frothy as a cappuccino in Venice. Enter Heinrich Nestlé, a man with a twinkle in his eye and a strangely powerful draw to milk. His love affair with milk had, by this point, evolved into a full-blown passion project, leading Nestlé to navigate the charming labyrinth of Italian villages. His mission: to strike a deal that could turn even the choicest of mozzarella lovers to the whimsy of powdered milk. Now, the Italians have a special magic when it comes to dairy, and so convincing them to embrace a chalky alternative might seem as daunting as teaching a cow to sing opera. But alas, Heinrich was undeterred. This is where the universe decided to unleash its comedy, in the form of a language barrier. You see, despite his efforts and attempts at charades, with a milk churn prop, Heinrich often found his earnest declarations greeted with polite confusion or sudden enthusiastic applause when he managed to accidentally order 25 kilos of gelato instead of discussing milk contracts. To add to this scene of sleepy, rustic negotiation, the local milkmaids were often quick to indulge him, hoping to teach him the lyrical beauty of Italian, for they believed fewer things were more adorable than a determined foreigner tangled in the intricacies of their multisyllabic language. Nestlé's attempts at Italian were endearing, often mixing up mucca, cow, with muco, an imaginative invention that had locals gently correcting him with a smile, a wink, and sometimes a homemade ricotta pumpernickel as a peace offering. Even with language challenges swirling around like the gentle snowcaps above, Heinrich's charm eventually succeeded. The illustrious Nestlé contracts found their way into many hardy milking barns, promising modern convenience and future collaborations. ones less tumultuous than their linguistic beginnings. Legend has it that in the summers, village kids saw this peculiar foreigner and dubbed him Mr. Moo, a nickname that Heinrich himself embraced with the gusto of a man who knew how to laugh at his own missteps. As the toothy sun laid down its head on the horizon, Nestlé graciously reciprocated the hospitality, introducing the inventive formula to a more global palate. Under his watch, Nestlé's cowless milk shook the kitchens of mothers and chefs worldwide, ushering in a legacy that changed pantries forever. Italian bovines continued their grazing, unbothered by the commotion of human enterprise, serenely indifferent to the spiraling curiosity about how powdered milk could ever stand against milk drawn from plush, verdant valleys. They remained blissfully unaware of their vital roles in inspiring that particular entrepreneurial pivot. And so, as moonbeams fell softly, like gossamer threads across those sleepy hills, a gentle peace reigned, one that left both farmers and Nestlé's vision agriculture bound, celestial bound, and somehow more globally bound than these quaint beginnings could have suggested. With a quiet chuckle, we must now nudge our storytelling train gently back onto the tracks, ready to carry you onward through the night to the next curious and enchanting tale of Nestlé's ever so intriguing history. Let sleep settle in, for there are plenty more canvases of history where unexpected truths are painted softly against the starry night. In the pastoral days of Switzerland circa the late 19th century, when winter mornings were adorned with sun-kissed snowflakes that glittered like mischievous pearls, there existed an often overlooked culinary debacle, the curious case of Henri Nestlé and his attempts at peddling his now renowned baby formula. Ah, yes, the gentle Swiss Alps, where yodeling echoes as if nature herself were whispering lullabies to the valleys below. And among these serene disasters and delightful cheddars, there was our dear Henri, who was possibly contemplating whether his infant formula would ever find its rightful cradle. You see, Nestlé's milk concoction wasn't merely a result of scientific advancement. Oh no, it was rather tinged with mysterious outcomes that were both unpredictable and mildly entertaining. Originally concocted to aid infants who couldn't be nourished by the traditional, more bosom-related means, Henri found himself in quite the predicament when his curious attempts began to invoke suspicion rather than sales. Imagine the scene. Bustling town markets with vibrant clinks of copper coins, exchanging a mix of gruffly shouted prices in French and German. Meanwhile, Nestlé would be quietly discussing the virtues of his concoction, which often involved a stern demonstration of its rather odd ability to bubble unexpectedly, leading to a few skeptical raised eyebrows. Picture these bustling Swiss townsfolk, faces adorned with expressions somewhere between curiosity and amusement, trying to comprehend the logic behind purchasing a curious bottle that drew parallels with the town's fizzier drinks. Sans the necessary carbonation delight, of course. The economy of suspicion led to further public relations antics that even included a mesmerizing puppet show, creatively designed by Nestlé's rather avant-garde nephew. This show, complete with a little puppet cow named Clara Butterworth, attempted to educate parents about the formula's benefits, which, quite amusingly, depicted Clara strutting around proclaiming, "Moving towards milk of the future." Sadly, Clara's performance only seemed to entertain the children more than convince their pragmatic parents. However, in a miraculous twist of fate, the magic of this milk formula began to catch on. Perhaps it was the random bursts of new parents discovering their baby's liking for the odd taste, or the hopeful glint in Henri's eyes during his market stall presentations that eventually captivated a few curious minds. Stories whispered through cobblestone streets and candlelit squares that this bubbling concoction might actually be efficient. And so came the delightful ticker tape parade for Nestlé, fast-forwarding through time like a charmingly vintage film reel, spiraling into his beloved 20th century. Scandals of bubbling milk turned to successful formulas, culminating in a rather cheeky global expansion. Yet, dear listeners, let not those cheekbones droop just yet into your pillows. for there remain more delights and whimsical truths in upcoming tales as our story continues gently to uncover the subtler wheels and deal-makings which kept Nestlé serenading through history like a skillful Swiss maestro. But for now, as your eyes grow heavier and dreams of bubbling bottles transform into soothing lullabies of the mind, rest in the comforting knowledge that even amidst peculiar puppets named Clara and inventive alpine endeavors, sometimes the world's greatest stories, from hiccuping formula beginnings to global culinary influence, can spring forth from the most utter of odds. As the echoes of snow-laden laughter roar softly into the night, feel the cloak of history's oddities drape gently over your resting shoulders, inviting you to dream of what whimsies might unfurl next. As we tiptoe through the corridors of history, it's time to peel back the delicate layers of one particularly contentious debate that swirled around Nestlé like a frothy cappuccino left to cool: instant coffee. In the 1930s, Nestlé unveiled this magical elixir with the flair of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, forever transforming how the world prepared that precious morning ritual. But oh, the scandal it brewed. Imagine, if you will, a bustling cafe in the heart of Paris. It's 1938, and the air is thick with the aroma of artisanal brews, where gentle folk cradle steaming cups of carefully percolated perfection. Enter Nestlé, brandishing jars of your morning cup in granular form. Sacré bleu. Some coffee purists clutched their chests, horrified, fearing the decline of civilization itself. For what sorcery was this? To add mere water and produce a beverage they revered like an art? A lively debate ensued. On one side, the aficionados lamented the loss of craftsmanship in coffee making, regaling anyone who would listen about the joys of properly ground beans and the gentle hiss of a stovetop espresso. On the other, harried housewives across continents, clutching their pearls and debating if they'd ever open a can of beans again. Instant coffee, though, was more than a quick fix for busy mornings. At heart, it promised innovation, an invitation to modernity that came in a clever jar. Shipped off to the front lines during World War II, it buoyed the spirits of soldiers with the warmth and comfort of home in every tin. Imagine their relief, finding solace in familiarity amid the chaos of war. Their letters home not only full of love, but praising this newfangled invention. Nestlé had managed to take a morning ritual and distill it into a convenience as pocket-sized as a GI's notebook. Then again, one had to marvel at the intangible alchemy behind instant coffee. Dehydrated infusion, crystallized essence, as if coffee had joined the space race before the space race was even a twinkle in humanity's eye. For some, this seemed delightful and revolutionary. For others, it was akin to defacing the Mona Lisa with pixels. For all the gruff and groans of traditionalists, instant coffee was here to stay, a spirited reminder of the world's inexorable march towards efficiency. In hindsight, one might wryly note that people will protest any change, even if it comes with extra caffeine. As Nestlé innovatively churned out new products, their researchers, like caffeinated wizards, experimented endlessly to quell criticism while perfecting flavor. They even dared to answer the age-old question, could instant coffee become the everyday coffee of the masses without tasting like a compromise? Imagine taste testers with clipboards and furrowed brows, sipping cautiously and nodding approvingly, their deliberations now a historical footnote to the instant revolution. So what have we learned today, while gently drifting off deeper into the annals of history? Remember that Nestlé's rise was not without its share of gusty debates whipped up like the frenetic chatter at a lively dinner party. Each advancement met with chuckles and chucking of tradition into the bin of yesteryear, paving the sweetly scented road of progress. If you're awake enough to brew another cup, contemplate this. Isn't it fascinating how controversy often accompanies innovation, with history forever turning its pages, like one who stirs gently before sinking again into the pillows of slumber? And as the steam lifts from those long-forgotten coffee cups, we find ourselves ready to drift into yet another chapter, where more tales of Nestlé's impact on the global stage await, like the faint tendrils of dawn stretching over coffee plantations around the world, nestled gently into the fabric of our story like a finely sewn Swiss quilt. We arrive at the tale of Nestlé's surprisingly bubbly foray into the world of carbonated adventures, an endeavor so fizzy it might just tickle you to sleep. Imagine for a moment, if you will, a young and ambitious Henri Nestlé, moustache impeccably twirled, pondering the refreshing potential of an effervescent beverage long before soda water would make a splash. In the late 1800s, Nestlé, the company, not the man himself. Remember, Henri had retired to enjoy his well-earned respite, yet his legacy continued to pop, took an effervescent detour. They sought to capture not just the essence of milk, but of merriment, coaxed to the surface by a gentle bubbling that promised to soothe the human soul. The great minds at Nestlé's, let's call it Department of Bubbling Enthusiasm, believed that milk and fizz could dance beautifully together, creating a symphony of gentle burbles, with nutrients only slightly masked by the encroaching froth. However, history has cleverly tucked this experiment into a little-known corner, turning faded page into bedtime curiosity. Like a fizzy confection dissolving elegantly in a glass, this escapade began with a partnership between Nestlé and an Austrian chemist known for his knack with effervescence, who apparently had once almost carbonated his pet goldfish, an unfortunate mishap promptly tucked away from public knowledge. Lo and behold, what emerged was nothing short of an effervescent treasure. Lacté gazeux, fancy name, isn't it? A magnificent attempt to make milk bubbly. Picture the soft murmurs of tiny bubbles erupting from creamy depths, a solvent meeting solvent in a frothy embrace. It was an innovation brave enough to dare dreams, but perhaps a tad too audacious for Victorian taste buds, attuned to the modest chuckle of filtered tea. The marketing pitch could have doubled as a bedtime rhyme. Why take your milk flat when it can percolate? Alas, the snappy tagline was lost in translation alongside the beverage itself. Skeptical Parisians and Londoners found the blend altogether too revolutionary. The carbonated milk craze fizzled out quietly, choosing not to fight the tide of disdain it met whilst resigned to recline as a cocooned memory. And yet, from its frothy failure sprang inspiration like awakening from a dream. The Nestlé we know today, emboldened by lessons in chemistry and courage, would channel this spirit of inquiry into new realms. Chocolate and coffee, synonymous with smiles, as they opted for simpler associations with hotness over fizz. After all, if hydrating the world would not be achieved through frothy tumult, perhaps caffeinated pleasure was the answer. A tangent in chai-churning machinery, perhaps inspired by the whirling, twirling froth maker of their lost carbonated dream. Yet, their caffeine-filled fantasies found more steadfast adherents than poor Lacté Gazou ever managed. As we let this tale dissolve into the ether of sleep, do you hear the soft sighs of bubbles left untamed? They whisper way into gentle forgetfulness, paving the way for new chapters and new dreams. Glide with them serenely, dear listener, towards the next horizon, where we'll uncover further forgotten follies and legendary foibles entwined in the Nestlé narrative. For now, let the echoes of effervescence soothe you to sleep, promising adventure and learning in the chapters yet to dance their way into your dreams in the dim, tea-scented alleys of late 19th century Switzerland, when darkness cast long shadows perfect for outrageous conspiracies and nocturnal pacing. A man named Henri Nestlé was not skulking about discussing world domination. Instead, he was stirring about in his workshop, engaged in battles of a different kind, chiefly how to revolutionize baby food without turning ingredients into alchemical gold steps listed by a medieval herbalist. You see, Henri Nestlé, being quite the culinary chemist, wasn't just trying to whip up the era's version of dinner for one. He was on a milkier mission. Tinkering with cow's milk, sugar, and wheat flour, Henri set out to address infant malnutrition, risking all the raised eyebrows of his peers who probably wondered why anyone would choose to toil over baby formula instead of inventing more luxurious chocolate. With a sprinkle of whimsy and a dash of industrial calculation, Nestlé crafted farine lactée, a fortified baby food that was supposed to ensure survival, if not encore performances in a naptime opera. As successful as this powdered miracle was, it laid the foundation for Nestlé to become a behemoth in the industry, shaping its own culinary empire without wielding any physical swords, just the ones stirring cream mixtures into perfection under the Swiss moonlight. But what's a historical rise without hiccups? Around this time, a few anomalies slithered into the picture, as every mountainous rise thus might expect. There were whispers, perhaps more than whispers if chickens had human vocal cords, that the trade of condensed milk, another beloved invention egged on by the likes of Gail Borden over in America, might sometimes outdo its promises of purity. Some shipments arrived smelling less fresh, Swiss meadows and more like the socks of a jogger who'd misplaced his shoes in a field of onions. Let's just say the successes came with a lactose-tolerable amount of scandal. In the corridors of this emerging enterprise, boardroom tales unfolded with charismatic pluck and cautious optimism. Questions filled the air. Why did children who weren't always nourished properly seem to miss the sprightly joys of life, like chasing geese or pulling at mustaches? Perhaps the laughter was less about the actual moments of childhood frolic, and more due to the robust catalogue of dance moves demonstrated by businessmen trying to dodge pesky production failures. Henri Nestlé, if he had been in sync with the current social dance trends of his time, might have invented the first dignified version of the moonwalk to sidestep such awkward blunders. Despite these challenges, or perhaps spurred with determination to iron out the milk-stiff kinks, the brand thickened like particularly stubborn Satan pudding. Nestlé soldiered on, as companies are wont to do when they've earmarked a burgeoning global market for, say, every human fond of a warm glass of milk before bed. Amid these developments, as dreams of international expansion began hatching across great and mighty borders, the brand, soon to be spearheaded by another generation of floaters with dreams, also considered diversifying the menu a tad, for who didn't appreciate the nuance of a product line promising all things nutritious, or least the ones fitting snugly into a Victorian aesthetic of growth. Thus, dear wandering mind, as Nestlé chalked its path from quaint Swiss novelty into an emblem of something far grander, this isn't the last we'll hear of heinous hilarity and worldwide expansion that tickles historical curiosity right between the pages of industry journals and family recipes. But sleep beckons softly with dreams made sweet by the promise of tomorrow's slightly more scandalous vignettes, bringing a new dawn for our gentle narrative of ambitious dairy drinkers and the foibles of forgotten controversies. Let the quiet anticipation be a lullaby as you drift into slumber's warm embrace, content with whispers of histories yet to unfold. In the mild and mellow embrace of the 1960s, a decade that seemed to carry the faint scent of incense and revolutionary awakenings, Nestlé was crafting a global narrative that was anything but dull. While flower children danced in parks and the world witnessed a remarkable dance of culture and creativity, Nestlé had its hands deeply plunged into food and filter paper, elbow deep in coffee grounds and ambitions. Now, my dear listener, imagine, if you will, a board meeting. Sleek ties and thicker glasses crowd around a table laden with enough maps and stocks to make anyone yawn. These strategists were plotting routes rivaled only by those of historic explorers. The world, you see, was their tablecloth. They were about to embark on a grand journey, one which would make the age of discovery seem like a leisurely Sunday stroll in the park. Their secret weapon, nothing less remarkable than instant coffee, poised to caffeinate a bewildering array of sleepy villages and burgeoning metropolises alike. But let's meander through one of the more curious tales from this era, where the peanut met the coffee bean in a tumultuous yet platonic embrace. Inspired by the whirling tides of culinary creativity, Nestlé's food scientists endeavored to concoct a fabled new product one that would blend everyone's favorite nutty legume with their morning cup of Java. Picture a soft, creamy spread that tried to tell the world, yes, you can have it all. Peanut butter and coffee together at last. It was named, albeit not too imaginatively, the Nutty Espresso Dream. To encourage this vision, the research team dabbled in alchemy in the kitchen, aiming to combine the smooth, oily consistency of peanuts with the robust bitterness of coffee. Alas, chemistry is a fickle partner, more mysterious than history's most obscure dioramas. The resulted concoction tasted eerily reminiscent of soggy toast drenched in morning breath. One taste test was enough, ending any future brunches featuring a coffee-flavored peanut spread. While culinary ambition took a brief nap, Nestlé's global conquest was anything but dormant. As legal pads and fountain pens drew battle lines on the globe, Nestlé encountered an unexpected adversary: local customs. In the tiny yet orderly nation of Sweden, a group of determined lagom practitioners weren't too keen about being infused with caffeine at foreign hands. In true Swedish style, they proposed fika, a revered cultural practice of relaxing with coffee and cake that was more about sharing time rather than a caffeine jolt. This was their stealthy way of resisting Nestlé's aggressive caffeole invasion. Undeterred, Nestlé tailored marketing strategies with all the flexibility of a contortionist in a trapeze show. They vowed to respect fika, even managing to conjure up specially designed Swedish cakes laden with enough sugar to sweeten any sour business deal. However, the Swedes convinced Nestlé to slow down their conquest's caffeine content, thus keeping the sanctity of fika intact. This marked not just an agreement of commerce, but a gentle handshake across cultures, showing that even global giants need to partake in a coffee break once in a while. So there we have it, an era with both impossibly smooth plenishments and delightful mishaps, marking the path of Nestlé's relentless rise to world fame. An age where ambitious ideas blended, sometimes collided, and on rare whimsical occasion, invented consumables of questionable taste. As night blankets us in its tender darkness, we ponder the modest coffee bean's art of persuasion, silent, aromatic, changing the world one sip at a time. Nestlé's rise may have been filled with controversy and calculated moves, but let's leave our critical eye dimmed for a moment as we drift further into history's delicate embrace, ready to unfurl more tales told quietly beneath the starry sky. As the sweeping tale of Nestlé's journey unfurled like an intricately stitched quilt, it was time to cozy up to an episode so comically inconspicuous that history almost forgot to write it down. Today, dear listener, we drift into the syrupy, not-so-sweet world of Nestlé's adventures with caramel. Yes, that orange-hued, sticky confectionery staple that has an uncanny ability to glue your teeth together while mesmerizing your taste buds with its buttery charm. Picture the year 1905, a time when the world was still trying to recover from the blinding fascination with inventions like the electric toaster, and where caramel waged its silent war to claim its place in the pantheon of sweets. Enter Henri Nestlé's successors, who, despite being among the serious patron saints of condensed milk mountain, saw fit to dip their toes or spoons in sugar syrup. Nestlé's foray into the caramel cosmos was nothing short of ambitious. Not content with merely wrapping soft pieces in cheerful wax papers, they set their collective sights on crafting caramel syrup by the barrel, waving goodbye to tub-style dominance and cracking a cunning plan that even Willy Wonka might tap dance to. It was an operation rivaled only by the complexity of creating your mom's favorite casserole without looking at the recipe. But, as it so often happens when humans tango with the tempestuous elements of sugar, melting points and caramelization, a mildly charred reality collided with audacious aspiration. The first trials were, shall we say, delightfully disastrous. One might imagine a scene reminiscent of a Looney Tunes episode, with exploding pots and confectioners hastily dodging geysers of molten sugar. The factory may have been filled with billowing clouds of smoke, but at least it smelled delicious. Undaunted, the Nestlé team tweaked, tasted and theorized, a typical scientist's modus operandi, except with a bit more sugar-induced hyperactivity. Like alchemists of old, they sought to transform simple ingredients into golden nectar. And eventually, they succeeded. Caramel's gilded cape unfurled under their guidance, and it became not just a candy, but a versatile ambrosial syrup ready to sweeten coffees, drizzle over desserts, and somehow transform an ordinary morning into something extraordinary. Who needed an alarm clock when the morning surrogate for rooster calls was a steaming cup of coffee crowned with a silky caramel flourish? However, much like a cat basking in sunlit glory right before falling off a ledge, Nestlé's caramel syrup found itself embroiled in a fiercely contested sugar scandal. Allegations, disputes, and debates flew with all the gravity of feathers in a windstorm. Critics claimed excess sweetness, others no more than subtle mimicry of existing products, a true Sichu tempest in a teacup full of caramel-laced chai. But Nestlé's syrup stuck to its guns, perhaps because it was just so naturally sticky. And slowly, but surely, it oozed into the daily routines of homes across Europe and beyond. From mountain chalets to seaside cottages, the once beleaguered caramel sauce had earned its time in the limelight, shining like liquid gold on puddings and flans, always accompanied by the capricious grin of satisfaction. And so, with caramel's sticky debut having navigated the rocky roads of controversy, and likely many unfortunate kitchen mishaps, Nestlé's fortuitous foray into sugar alchemy found its footing once more in jocular juxtaposition. The barons of butter and sugar had somehow made the world a little sweeter, and whether as a commendable culinary accoutrement or as an indulgent indulgence, caramel syrup took its rightful place upon the dainty dessert throne. Eventually, the night falls like softly woven dreams, and as this particular chapter of confectionery capers begins to wax and wane, one can almost hear the gentle murmur of Nestlé executives, perhaps chuckling quietly over a bedtime cup of hot cocoa, contemplating what came next in this rich and flavorful tapestry. And so, dear dreamy listeners, with our caramel-coated amuse-bouche concluding with all the stickiness of honeyed nostalgia, let us glide gently towards our next delectable tale. In a quiet corner, cradled between the vaults of history and the whimsical world of commerce, lies the tale of Nestlé's less renowned adventure, the great condensed milk caper of the 19th century. A tale so understated, it nearly, almost, but never quite graduated to anything resembling a global scandal. We shall drift gently into this story, allowing it to guide us toward a place of restful curiosity. It was a time when condensed milk was being heralded as both a miracle product and a topic of conversations over imported afternoon teas. The world was coming to terms with innovative dairy preservation, allowing milk to linger on shelves rather than in cows. Enter Henri Nestlé, our protagonist, a man with a knack for transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary, and, not to mention, a rather dapper moustache. Henri, as you might have expected, had extended his curiosity beyond the mundane, set firmly in the whimsical pursuit of making milk both magical and indestructible. While most inventors were tying themselves up with wires and wheels, Henri was busy toying with the idea of a milk product that could survive the long, arduous journey on a ship to far-off places like the lowlands and the Queen's own patch of turf. A milk product that could endure a rainy day without losing its gumption. Of course, as every story worth its froth must have it, rival companies were not quite as amused by Henry's shenanigans in the dairy pantry. Just imagine, if you will, in twill suits and bowler hats, a secret committee of milkmen huddled together in smoke-filled rooms, plotting to outdo the clever Swiss inventor. Their plans, naturally, lacked a certain creaminess. Nestlé's condensed milk wasn't just a dairy product. It was an environmentally adaptable marvel, tantalizing with the promise of safety and shelf longevity. Yet, as much as Henry preferred to tinker with recipes and cans, he was oblivious to the bubbling whisper of dissent trickling through the cobblestone streets like a spilled cask of new ale. The quiet uproar began when rumors spread that in order to achieve his masterful concoction, Henri was recruiting retired magicians from carnivals, repurposing their fantastical skills to condense clouds into tins. True or sweet fiction. The line was as blurred then as it feels now while recounting it under the soft cover of night. But let us not rush to conclusions. After all, the Victorian age was famously full of wondrously questionable beliefs. Some considered the raccoon a perfectly acceptable house pet. And yet, a subplot almost as intoxicating as the condensed milk itself was the rumor that Henri had managed to outrun all gossip, not by confronting it, but by continuing to craft what was indisputably a well-received product. He encapsulated hope, and perhaps just a sliver of childhood whimsy for a world longing for stability in a can. And so, the legend of Nestlé's persistent pursuit coalesced, quite unexpectedly, into the firm foundation of trust from the very public the whispers tried to sway. Its reliability, its adaptability, and its extraordinary shelf life won the hearts of households across Europe and beyond. Perhaps it was even those turned-around rumors that became the very melody sung by seasick sailors, and yet to be discovered influencers of an analog age, marking the rise of the milk that conquered the world. As we gently close this chapter, let us ponder the thought that somewhere along the lazy corridors of time, the imagined dispute over whether condensed milk was birthed by fair means or fealty became a cozy tale to share by the fire, a yarn as comforting as warm milk itself. As you let your eyelids softly close, the sumptuous scent of sweetened history seeping into dreams, know that the saga of Nestlé continues. Next, we'll explore an unexpectedly fishy tale involving sardines, the high seas, and perhaps a sprinkle of serendipity. Until then, let your thoughts settle like dust on the diary of those who dared to dream beyond the antiquities of everyday possibility. Sweet dreams await. When we last left our tale, we were sauntering languidly through the cocoa-scented corridors of history, where Nestlé found itself unfurling its banner over increasingly broader territories. And now, dear listeners, as you nestle into your oh-so-comfortable pillows, prepare for a cozy trot through the curious Nutella-like spread of chocolatey controversies that dot this leg of Nestlé's journey. Ah, the 1970s, a decade rich with bell-bottoms, disco, beats, and a rather more obscure scenario involving powdered milk, a very specific outfit your groove-in history professors might have forgotten to mention. It was during this era of pulsating dance floors and mustachioed swagger that Nestlé found itself embroiled in the infamous infant formula controversy. Picture this. It was a mistake that brewed with all the elegance of an oversteeped teabag. The heart of this caffeine-free uproar was nestled in the impoverished corners of the globe, where Nestlé, in all its ambitious zeal, had been promoting infant formula over breast milk among mothers. The very slogan, repeated like a catchy jingle heard over and over, suggested that bottle-fed is best, even when that meant mothers had to use contaminated water, leading to a rise in infant mortality due to malnutrition and diseases. In an odd twist reminiscent of a Shakespearean subplot, the controversy sparked an international boycott, and Nestlé waded through widespread, a backlash as it struggled under the weight of the ethical dilemma. Companies, like characters in a classic farce, scurried to either side of the stage, some supporting the boycott, and others trying to shield the brand from mounting criticisms. The debacle unfolded like an opera of entitlement and audacity, but without the lively arias to serenade the tension. Meanwhile, across the sea, up north in lush expanses, a different kind of Nestlé tale was brewing. This episode might have slipped the notice of our dartboard historians, but it involves the Icelandic cod wars, a subject as seemingly fishy as it is fascinating. You see, in those tumultuous waters of the North Atlantic, where cod had been the prime occupation and preoccupation, Nestlé managed to unwittingly inherit a Piscean predicament. At some point, amid territorial disputes over fishing rights with Britain, Nestlé acquired a stake in a fish processing company, miraculously intersecting the paths of dairy behemoth and deep-sea dexterity while avoiding any lethal harpoons to its reputation. The cod wars simmered down without Nestlé acquiring scales or fins, and its involvement in this salty affair became a peripheral footnote in the grand volume of its expansive history. As the decade slipped serenely into the 1980s, audiences turned their eager gaze toward technology's rising star, the personal computer. Here, Nestlé deftly navigated the shifting tides, investing in technology like a savvy sailor reading the winds. The company even dabbled in software, where algorithms met almonds and data met dairy. Surely an amusing juxtaposition if there ever was one. And so, under the flickering neon lights of the era, with shoulder pads and synthesizers abounding, Nestlé continued to burgeon, a curious blend of commerce and conscience, where every bean counted, both cocoa and coffee, whether in a thermos or a thought bubble. It was a journey weaving episodes of triumph and teachable moments, a narrative eternally caffeine-fueled. As you drift deeper into restful realms, imagine every sip of coffee as a step in our upcoming journey, a soothing ripple across a steaming surface, revealing yet another temptation for our storytelling saga to explore. And as our narrative unwinds beneath the moon's watchful eye, we shall follow Nestlé into further horizons where tomorrow unveils newer shores. Until then, dear dreamer, let the gentle cadence of history lull you into serene slumber. In the soft-lit corridors of history, where the dust rarely gets disturbed and the shadows hold hands for comfort, we find Nestlé once again, teetering on the edge of another controversy. Picture, if you will, a world where chocolate bars were rationed like whispers during a game of telephone. This was the post-World War II era, and Nestlé was determined to weave its confections into the very fabric of global peace through increased consumption of sweetness. And what better way to achieve this than through the magic act of blending traditional advertising with the subtle art of persuasion found in subliminal messaging? Yes, dear listener, our tale tonight revolves around the whispered controversy of subliminal ads that allegedly infiltrated minds as efficiently as midnight snacks disappear from a fridge raid. One can't help but imagine stern executives in their pinstripe suits grinning like Cheshire cats as the company experimented with the idea of slipping chocolate desires into the subconscious. Sadly for Nestlé, the 1950s and 60s public wasn't quite ready for sugar-coated trickery, and soon, a small scandal erupted like fizzy pop in a shaken bottle. As we drift deeper into our story, with the soft sound of moonlight meeting history's pages, let us visit an enchanting little village nestled on the banks of Lake Geneva. Here, Nestlé made its storied headquarters, a real-life Willy Wonka factory, only with more office politics and fewer Oompa Loompas. It was rumored that the walls whispered tales in the dead of night of arguments over powdered milk formulas and oaths sworn on cocoa beans. One of the lesser-known escapades from this Swiss Shangri-La involved not milk or chocolate, but rather the hushed endeavor of creating the world's smoothest coffee instantaneously. Enter the Nestlé scientists, clad in lab coats that flapped like seagull wings, tirelessly working on their caffeinated opus. Little did they know, however, that their pursuit of the perfect cup would brew a tempest in a teacup, as whispers about Nestlé buying up global coffee supplies sent the industry into a rare moment of jitteriness. The gossip spread like caffeine through a morning meeting. Was Nestlé hoarding the world's coffee beans? Were they not just crafting coffee, but plotting to caffeinate every corner of the earth? The answer, dear listener, can be found somewhere between reality and the froth of conspiracy tales, where facts meet the delightful frolic of exaggeration. As we inch closer to a gentle conclusion, let us admire the sheer tenacity Nestlé embodied in its bid for global recognition, sometimes stepping on toes, occasionally dunking them in a hot brew, but always managing to remain at the forefront of culinary invention. Their persistence was akin to a Swiss watch, complex, precise, and just as likely to tick on even when you wish it might pause for a snooze. In the dreamlike haze that surrounds this chapter of their journey, we find ourselves marveling at how curiosity, commerce, and controversy danced an intricate waltz, each partner occasionally stepping on the other's toes but never breaking the flow. As our narrative draws to a close, we are left contemplating how such colourful bits of history often remain swathed in the pastel hues of yesteryear's dreams. And so, dear listener, let your thoughts drift gently, like feathers on the deep blue waters of the Swiss lakes. Rest easy and await the final slumberous chapter of our tale, or perhaps linger in the twilight glimmers of Nestlé's history until morning nudges you gently awake as the drowsy shadows of night gently blanket your weary eyelids. Let's take one last quiet stroll through the storied lanes of Nestlé's history, a path that winds tenderly around questionable corporate decisions and tiny chocolate bars that seem to vanish mysteriously from your kitchen cupboard. Picture, if you will, a world where the chocolate is plentiful, the controversies are carefully nestled under rugs of neglect, and the delightful absurdities of yesteryear offer a soothing lullaby for the soul. Our tale unfolds in late 20th century Europe, where Nestlé's boardrooms brim with executives pondering how to conquer the world with a chocolate bar in one hand and a powdered milk controversy in the other. It's a delicate balance, much like trying to juggle 3 croissants while riding a unicycle. You see, Nestlé had ambitions as vast as a Swiss mountain range, hoping to convert the globe into one big chocolate fondue party. Their method? Encasing the world in sweetness, perhaps hoping a side of sugar would make the bitter taste of milk formula controversies more palatable. Their advertisements seem to coax the globe into a chocolate-induced slumber, whispering promises of blissful delight and hints of cocoa-covered dreams. Unfortunately, their fervor often veered into questionable territories, not unlike a sleepwalker trying to navigate a cluttered living room. At the heart of their endeavors was the notorious baby formula debacle, a blemish on their immaculate marketing facade, as debated as trying to claim that the moon is, in fact, made of cheese. Imagine an era before smartphones and viral tweets, where marketing stratagems were woven into the fabric of colonial legacies and parental instincts. Nestlé's attempt to capture markets through powdered formulas in developing nations brought as much controversy as it did convenience. It was like walking a tightrope in the wind while carrying cartons of milk. Amidst this storm, Nestlé draped itself in assurances and splendid packaging, a testament to the age-old strategy of wrapping problems in fancy ribbons and hoping no one peeks under them too closely. Yet even as ripples of outcry spread like ripples in a cocoa swirl latte, Nestlé's engineers were busy stirring up another concoction, the world's favorite chocolate bars. International boundaries blurred like a watercolor painting in the rain, as smart strategies and a dash of Swiss ingenuity bundled chocolate treats into suitcases, shipping pallets, and ultimately into the eager hands of children and adults alike. Chocolate, dear listeners, was the trusty steed of Nestlé's empire, a delicious distraction that promised smiles even as its corporate doings whispered sweet nothings to oblivious ears. As the world turned, like a spinning chocolate coin teetering precariously on its edge, Nestlé expanded into every possible nook and cranny of culinary delight. If there was a chance to sweeten an Ayurvedic herbal tea with a splash of cream or to add a sprinkle of confection to a daydream, Nestlé was often lurking nearby, waiting to unveil its next great innovation. And so, as our journey together through the annals of Nestlé's vast adventures draws to a close, imagine slipping into a serene state of sleepy satisfaction. For history, after all, is simply the ultimate bedtime story. The longer it lingers and the more soothed you are, the easier it is to drift into sweet slumber. As our imaginary chocolate aromas waft gently into dreams of milk and honey, the legacy of a global colossus rests, nestled quietly beneath the midnight sky, waiting for the sunbeam of another day, another story. And there, tucked snugly under fluffy blankets of time, you, dear listener, find that all is well under the governance of night's gentle hush. Sweet dreams, on this lullaby of history. We'll leave the rest of the world's secrets for another night.